Hello everyone, Eddie Smith here, coming at you with a long overdue video reviewing this book talking about Evo Morales. This book is called Evo Morales, The Extraordinary Rise of the First Indigenous President of Bolivia. It is by Martin Sivak. Martin had unprecedented access to Evo. For many years, he was able to follow along with Evo. So he wrote this book talking about Evo's rise to power, Evo's politics, the socialist revolution of sorts in Bolivia, but also just covering Evo's personal life, right? This is a pretty fun read. It's not a super dense historical book, but there's still a lot you can learn from it, and there's a lot that I think we can learn from Bolivia, the way they had their sort of nonviolent revolution there. And a movement towards socialism through the trade unions and then through seizing political power electorally. So we're going to talk about that a little more in depth. So like I said, it's a pretty easy and fun book to read there. Evo was elected in 2006. He was the very first indigenous president elected to Bolivia. Bolivia's got a long history of racist exploitation where the indigenous people have been forced to work for the colonizers. So Evo becoming the first indigenous president was a huge thing. Obviously, there are tons of racist attitudes and classist attitudes left over from the colonial period there. And Bolivia has been a country with a long history of dictators who are backed by the West. So Evo was rising to power through the Coca Growers Union. One of Bolivia's main crops is coca, which is used to make many things, one of the things being cocaine. But Evo always stresses, and he's pro-coca. There's been a U.S. drug war led against Bolivia by the DEA saying, look at all this cocaine that's coming into America. We need to nip it in the bud. We need to get rid of this Bolivian coca. And Evo says, no, we grow the coca and we use it to make shampoo and soap and other stuff. But then we sell it. And the cocaine is actually created in, I believe it's Japan before it ever gets to the U.S. So Evo says you have the DEA and these U.S. officers in Bolivia when Bolivians aren't even doing cocaine, right? We just grow the coca leaves and then we sell them, and our economy is partially based off that, mostly because Western companies for a long time have extracted things like coca from Bolivia. So there's a lot of turbulence in Bolivia. Evo's rising through the unions in the late 90s and the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, in 2000, you have the water crisis, and in 2003, you have the gas crisis in Bolivia. Situations where essentially the water was privatized, right? They said we're going to give the water over to multinationals rather than making water a publicly owned commodity that everyone has access to. This created mass protests, basically riots in the street. It was semi-violent protests, and they actually won. The Bolivian dictator actually said, this is too much. We're going to lose power here by trying to privatize this water and give it away to Western multinationals, while the U.S. was saying, no, just do it, just privatize. It's the way to go. But the people said, no. Forget this, and that was in the early 2000s. Same thing happened with gas in 2003. So Evo then wins election in 2006, promising to nationalize more industry, not only keep coca, the coca leaf industry around, not only to keep water nationalized, but to nationalize the hydrocarbon industry, nationalize the entire gas industry, nationalize the tin and lithium industries. And because of this, the U.S. portrayed him as a drug trafficker. Because of his support of the coca leaf, the U.S. portrayed him as this international narcotics terrorist who needs to be overthrown. And if you look at anything about Evo in the U.S. media, you're going to find things about him being a narcotics dealer. But what it's really about is Evo wanted to nationalize all of Bolivia's natural resources. So this includes, yes, coca, which is sold out of Bolivia and then can be refined into cocaine, but also the hydrocarbons, also the gas, also the lithium. These are the natural resources that the U.S. is really interested in. So the U.S. media portrays Evo as this drug trafficker, and the Bolivian bourgeoisie, their media sort of portrays Evo as not only a drug trafficker, but this sort of dumb hick who just doesn't understand politics and doesn't understand economics because he's an indigenous person. And this is a stereotype that you saw with the rise of Hugo Chavez, that you've seen with Lula in Latin America, where they have these stereotypes of indigenous people as sort of these dumb hicks, which is funny almost considering how well Evo ran the government and how much he learned about economics and about industry in his time as government. And one of his main skills, as we'll talk about later, was surrounding himself with people who understood the things that he himself didn't understand. So after coming to power, Evo invested in food vouchers for kids, invested in Social Security for people 60 and up. Foreign companies who were taking 82% of the profit out of Bolivia and paying 18% to the government, Evo reversed that. So now they were paying 82% of the profits they made off Bolivian resources to the Bolivian government, and the company could only keep 18%. So we're seeing here the U.S. losing power and losing a foothold over Bolivia, while the Bolivian people are seeing the wealth that's created by their labor and by their natural resources reinvested in their country via things like Social Security and food vouchers. And of course, during this time, you're going to see massive reductions in poverty, massive reductions in infant mortality, massive reductions in hunger, and actually an increase in GDP, which is interesting. And Luis Arce, who's now the president of Bolivia post-U.S. coup, who has won in an election, and Evo has been returned to the country. We'll talk about that more later. Evo always had Luis Arce and other people like Arce around him who were economists, who were trained in industry, who were trained in understanding the global markets, who were trained in dealing with these giant private multinationals to try and build socialism in Bolivia, right? To do things like reverse what that multinational was paying to the Bolivian government from 18% and taking 82% profit, reversing that. That's just one example of a policy that was implemented. Because they understood the multinationals who were in their country. They understood the conditions of Bolivia. And if Evo didn't understand the conditions, he had people around him who understood the conditions. So they knew exactly what to pitch. And that's why, even though they had nationalization, and even though every libertarian will promise you that nationalization could never work, one, they were able to reinvest in their people, but two, they were able to grow their GDP. They were producing more stuff and exporting more resources than they were when the multinationals had control of Bolivia. So really, you're seeing Bolivia building socialism in the 21st century, right? Building socialism in the face of U.S. imperialism and in the face of neoliberalism, building a new path for themselves, nationalizing these industries, by understanding the economy. Sorry, my alarm went off and my video stopped recording. By understanding their own economy and by understanding the conditions of their own countries, how they were able to do that. So there's a lot of really cool personal stuff about Evo Morales in this book too, including talking about how he likes to dress in traditional, like, indigenous Bolivian garb rather than wearing stuffy suits or whatever else, which I thought was kind of cool. I don't think there's anything wrong with wearing suits or presenting yourself well, but I just like that he preferred to be casual and wear stuff that was made in Bolivia. He loves soccer. He plays soccer anytime he visits these countries. They set up soccer games between Evo and his bodyguards versus the other countries. Pretty funny. He has a short temper, so he's harsh with the people around him, but he keeps a lot of smart people around him. He's all about working with a team. And I mean, you could talk about bias. Like, obviously this book is pretty biased, but we're talking about the first indigenous president in Bolivian history who's looking to build socialism in the face of ridiculous, blatant imperialism from the U.S. So it's hard not to root for this guy, right? And this book builds a little bit of a cult of personality around him, but it's whatever. Like, you can still be critical of Evo and like his personality. And you can learn a lot about what he did, right? Because he built socialism by rising up through the trade unions, rising up through the major industries in Bolivia, and earning the respect and the support of the actual Bolivian working class. And that was what was able to help him eventually achieve political power. I did a review of Bernie's book a while back where he talked about how he achieved political power in Vermont. Very similar thing, working directly with the unions, not telling these people, this is what we're going to do for you, but listening to them. What do you want done? And then laying out a plan of, okay, we're going to do nationalization, reinvest in the people, blah, blah, blah. You can figure out the technical economic stuff, but it all stems from listening to the working class. We want dictatorship of the proletariat. The working class should be in control of the state. And Evo is from the working class, from the coca growers union. So there's things like when he goes and visits, I believe it was Cochabamba, I can't remember where he was visiting, where there's a huge group of coca growers. When he goes up to give a speech, all the people cheer. He's a coca grower just like us. He grows coca just like us. This is a country who's long used to seeing white dictators backed by the Western imperialist powers run their country. And now they see an indigenous person just like them, who grows coca just like them, running the country and reinvesting in them, bringing them food vouchers so they can eat for the first time. And the book also talks about how Evo grew up in poverty in Bolivia, and you see the kind of struggle he went through, and how much that must have motivated him to seize power. So yeah, want to avoid cult of personality, want to always be critical, but it's hard not to root for this guy. Like I said, there's been huge major U.S. influence in Bolivia throughout their entire history. The U.S. will either support centrist liberals like Carlos Mesa, who ran against Evo multiple times, or they'll support dictators like Hugo Bonzer, who was a brutal dictator ruling over Bolivia with the U.S. backing. Whoever the U.S. can get that's not a socialist, right? And Evo got a lot of help from Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro in learning how to inspect the burned palace, as it's called, which is basically Bolivia's capital, for cameras and stuff like that, and how to thwart assassination attempts from the CIA and from the West. So, of course, the book doesn't cover this, but in 2020, there was a coup. The U.S. realized they couldn't beat Evo in elections. So, of course, the revolution in Bolivia wasn't a violent revolution. It was a nonviolent revolution where the trade unions were organized, and then Evo rose through the trade unions and won election. So the U.S. starts backing Janine Áñez and this far right-wing National Unity Front, I believe is the name of the party. And this is a far-right, extremely racist party. You could definitely define them as a fascist party. They Christian fundamentalists, anti-Indigenous, and this is because Carlos Mesa, the centrist, the U.S. realized he wasn't going to beat Evo in an election. No matter how much support the U.S. and Western multinationals threw behind Mesa and the other centrist candidates, they couldn't beat Evo. Evo was too popular. He had raised their GDP and reinvested in the country. He still had the support of the masses. So what do? They back Áñez. They back the National Unity Front. They back the far right-wing racists because she's going to give the U.S. what they want economically. And for the U.S., they would rather have a racist dictator than they would have an indigenous socialist, because the racist dictator is going to give them what they want economically. Sure, the U.S. will take the liberal, too. Sure, the U.S. will take the centrist who doesn't say racist things but still gives U.S. corporations all they want. But if they can't get that, the CIA will support whoever it takes to end these policies of nationalization and reinvesting in the Bolivian people. And that's exactly what happened in the 2020 coup. And you see then, after Evo is ousted and seeks asylum in Mexico, the MAS wins election again, defeating Áñez's party and Mesa, the centrist, in an election. Is Luis Arce of the Movement for Socialism, the MAS party. The person who's been with Evo the whole time, serving as his economist, is the one who then wins election. And this is pretty interesting from a theoretical standpoint, because we talked about how this revolution was nonviolent, right? But the people on the ground, the trade unions, through Evo's entire reign of power, were calling to arm the revolution, saying, Evo, I know this was a nonviolent revolution. We took power via the ballot box and via the unions. But we need to arm ourselves because the U.S. is going to try and infiltrate us, and the ruling class is going to try and overthrow everything we've done here and all the gains we've made for workers. And that proved to be prescient. So what happened after the coup in 2019? The unions went on strike, mass strike, trying to shut down the entire country's economy, demanding that this undemocratic coup be reversed, that Evo be allowed back. And there was violence from the National Unity Front Party and Áñez and the U.S. and the CIA against trade unionists, against the Bolivian working class. Trade unionist Orlando Gutierrez, who was leading the struggle against this coup, was murdered. After Luis Arce eventually won election, he was killed with, or he wasn't killed, sorry, he was attacked with dynamite. This is a violent party, and we're seeing here the violent class struggle, right? Even in a non-violent revolution, you still have to realize that if you take economic power, they're going to try and kill you. The U.S. and the bourgeoisie is going to try and use violence to overthrow the revolution so that they can take economic power back. So this is why, people say arm the revolution or arm the working class. Even in Bolivia, a country with a non-violent revolution, they still had to arm themselves for self-defense. And this is really interesting from a theoretical standpoint, right? And I pulled out this quote on page 210 that kind of explains what the Bolivian Revolution was from a theoretical standpoint. It says, with traces of Indianism, of the national and the popular, of syndicalism and Marxism, Evo Morales has turned the MAS into a power structure that now controls the state and dares from this point forward to undertake the construction of a post-neoliberal model, perhaps the only serious one in Latin America. So you're seeing there with the mix of that kind of nationalist Indian identity of I'm an indigenous person, we've long been oppressed. He uses that. He uses Marxism to analyze the economy and analyze seizing state power. Actually, Marxism, Leninism, people in his inner circle were reading a lot of Lenin about taking state power and how to use state power. But they didn't have a violent revolution, like I said, right? There's a hint of syndicalism, of we're going to organize unions in the major sectors of the economy and use those unions to then control the state. And I think there's a lot to learn here for us in the U.S., right? People often talk about we're not just going to overthrow the government one day, right? The government's got sky guns, they have drones, and it's just kind of unrealistic. Right? We need to start with that economic organization on the ground. Our unions have been decimated. We do not have anywhere close to the union representation that Bolivia has, or anything close, or the unions in the U.S. have not advanced class struggle anywhere close to where the unions in Bolivia did, to where they were in a position to seize political power. Right? In the U.S. here, we're seemingly talking in circles about political issues and taking political power and how to fix our political sphere, while the economic organization gets totally left to the side. Right? We'll do mutual aid and stuff, but there's very few people looking to organize their workplaces, looking to truly organize the masses against the capitalist class and advance class struggle, which is what Marx was talking about. So yeah, a lot to learn from Bolivia. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Definitely check out this book if you want a nice, easy read about Evo Morales, the first indigenous president of Bolivia, and the socialist success story that is Bolivia, and the socialist success story in the 21st century. And you'll learn a lot about, you know, the 21st century movement across all of Latin America against neoliberalism and against imperialism. One last funny story from this, you know, you'll hear a lot of Americans say in Latin America, Che Guevara is thought of as Hitler. He's this evil, murderous dictator, and young, stupid college Americans like to wear Che Guevara on their shirts because they just don't know what he stood for. Obviously, that's untrue. Che is a symbol against neoliberalism and against imperialism. And when the U.S. ambassador came to visit Evo Morales in Bolivia's capital, Evo Morales had him unknowingly sit under a giant portrait of Che that was sitting in his office, and was just like, take a seat, and then talk to the guy, the U.S. ambassador, who stands for the country who has long backed murderous dictators in Bolivia, sitting under a picture of Che Guevara, the person who kicked the U.S. and the Batista dictatorship out of Cuba, and who stands as a symbol against the U.S. for all of Latin America. Pretty funny stuff there. Pretty good story. Definitely glad I read this book. Definitely worth your time. All right. Hope you all like this video. We'll see you next time.